You're listening to the Inspired Legacy Podcast on the Edify Podcast Network. This is episode 84.
Put God first.
Hey guys, it's Mark, your host and founder of the Inspired Legacy. As always, this is the show that equips and inspires you to leave a godly legacy. Well, I'm going to dive right in today. If you guys have been listening for a while, it's no secret that the show has been more or less dormant since about the first week of last November, and that was certainly not by design. So as I attempt to ramp back up here with the podcast, and before I get into episodes that feature any guests in the coming weeks, I wanted to take a few minutes today and share a little bit about why I ended up taking a break and why I hope that message will be relevant to some of you guys listening. So you might remember me mentioning this during some episodes here and there last year. I know I've mentioned it a time or two. In 2020, I started my own business. I left a comfortable job without getting into details why. I simply just needed a change. And anybody who's been in that situation, when you know, and I knew. And I was feeling stale, unchallenged, unmotivated. And again, I just knew I needed to make a change. So despite everything going on in the world during 2020, I told myself that if I waited for the perfect time, the perfect opportunity, that I'd probably never do it. So I ripped the Band-Aid off, made the leap, and honestly, I've not really looked back since. And all throughout 2021, by God's grace, He has provided. He has brought me opportunities, and the business grew basically steadily through 2021. And while I'm nowhere near where I want to be, things are good. But, what I didn't see coming, and in hindsight should have, was the transition from working for somebody else to working for myself. Completely turned my schedule upside down in ways that really I never anticipated. I went from a season, and by season, I mean like, 15 or 20 years of my career, but a season of life, more or less knowing what I needed to do from a scheduling standpoint for maintaining my job, right? Maintaining my work-life balance, maintaining focus on my faith, and in recent years, maintaining this podcast, knowing more or less what I needed to do day to day to keep those things moving, right? And keep them in a healthy spot. And I went from that to just scrambling every day, not really knowing what each day was going to look like, just constantly reacting, right? Jumping at any opportunity to meet with or get in front of certain people. And then, obviously squeezing as much as I could out of what was left in the day to execute work. And that often bled into nights, early morning and nights. So, pretty consistently burning the candle on both ends. And I'm definitely not complaining. That is not what this episode is about. The grind of solopreneurship is exactly what I wanted. It's what I signed up for, and more or less what I expected. But again, naively, I did not anticipate how much, or to the degree to which business ownership would disrupt my life. And I'm sure anybody listening right now who already owns their own business, or maybe has in the past, probably thinking, yeah, dummy, what did you expect was going to happen? And yeah, you're right. In hindsight, and, having said all of that out loud, I should have seen it coming. Unfortunately, not being prepared, I found myself in a spot where something had to give in my schedule. And this podcast was unfortunately one of those things. So last November, again, like I mentioned at the opening of the show, last November was the last time that I recorded and released an episode. And ever since then, even though my business was picking up steam and I was able to continue to, help provide for my family, every week that passed and I didn't record or release a new show, in the back of my mind, I just beat myself up a little more, and a little more with each passing week because, honestly, I attached, and I probably still battle with this to a certain degree, but I attached part of my identity and self-worth to this podcast. I started it because at the time. I felt like God had given me a vision. And up until last November, I had been fulfilling it. And then all of a sudden, I wasn't. And the more time that went by, the more frustrated I became until the holidays rolled around. And I typically take a break during the holidays anyway, right? With Thanksgiving and Christmas so close together, you've got travel, you got things going on with family, and you want to take time off and spend time with family anyway. So it's always been a nice time for me to just kind of take a break, recharge, reset. But because I had already taken a few weeks off, then we get into the holiday season. I just knew that that just compounded my anxieties, I guess, and my stress. And I think that it was at that point, again, looking back, hindsight's 2020. It was at that point that I just sort of succumbed to the possibility of never doing the show again. And again, I've talked in the past, if you go back and listen to episodes from last year, I have kind of toyed around with the idea of shutting down the podcast anyway. And I get into that a little bit. I'm not going to rehash those details, but that notion in the back of my mind, combined with now just facing what I thought, not having enough time for the show. I think I can pretty confidently say that when I look back at that moment, that is when a very real sense of apathy settled into my life. I wasn't depressed. Okay. I never felt like anybody needed to worry about me, but I had definitely lost my spark and some joy in my life. Cause I do get a sense of joy from this show. It's fun, to record, these episodes, get to talk to some really, smart and impressive men out there. And so I do get some joy out of it. But I had allowed my circumstances, which again, were not bad, right? They're just first world problems. But I had allowed my circumstances that were, again, not bad, but they were just different, right? They caught me off guard, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I had allowed them, they didn't force me, I allowed them to not only affect my mission with the Inspired Legacy, but I allowed it to creep into my relationship with God and how I viewed myself in the mirror, quite honestly. I wasn't consistently reading scripture. My prayer life suffered. My physical fitness suffered. Really, when it came down to it, other than working and earning money, I was neglecting just about every other important aspect of my life. I wasn't in a good place. I can say that now. Again, not depressed, just wasn't in a great place. And I just praise God that my marriage and my relationship with my son, who is the only kid we have left at home right now, that those relationships didn't suffer. And so the reason I wanted to share this is to give you some context as to why the show hasn't been active for a little while. But I'm sharing this because I know that there are guys listening who are either in a similar spot right now and maybe don't realize it, or guys who are in the fight and they just need some encouragement. So let me say this, okay? When I first heard this, it just hit me square between the eyes. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Let that sink in. I'll repeat it. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. That's a quote from Henry Ford. And I think it's very relevant to what I hope to get across to you guys today. If you've lost your spark, your joy, your motivation to chase your God-given purpose, then you can't expect to achieve it by doing what you've always done. And so for me, I knew that unless I made a change to my daily schedule, I would always find an excuse, a convenient excuse, to not read my Bible, to not revive my prayer life, to not take care of my body, to not record a podcast. I can keep going down the list, right? I could very easily convince myself to just, buckle up to the computer and just crank out work all day. Because again, I was making money. It would have been too easy to continue finding an excuse to not do the things if I didn't stop doing what I had been doing that was holding me back. If that makes sense. I don't think I said that very well. So again, for me, that meant reinventing my days, prioritizing the most important things in my life and making them first consistently each and every day. To quote my pastor, he says, I can't have high hopes for my life if I have low habits. And I had to change my habits because my old ones were not working anymore. So if you aren't happy with where you are or what you're achieving in life, whether it's at home or work, what habits do you need to change? What are your priorities? And if your response to that question is, well, my family's important, my faith is important to me, then show me your calendar, because your calendar will reveal what's really important to you. If the only thing you have officially scheduled is drinks after work or league night with the guys, whatever the case may be, then those are your priorities. And if you don't keep a calendar, then guys, you're just living a passive life. You're allowing the world and whatever it happens to throw at you to dictate your time. And you will always live a reactive lifestyle if you don't control your time. So I say all of that, just know that I don't have this all figured out, guys. And I'm not naive enough to think that it won't continue to be a challenge to keep this show going. But, so far, God willing, it seems to be working. I feel better. I feel more alive. And I'm pretty confident that it's because I've been more intentional with my time. And as a result, I've gained a renewed sense of purpose. So I just want to say, keep up the good fight, fellas. Choose to look beyond whatever's holding you back today. Focus on what matters most. And remember that God has a plan for you. So as I work to regain steam with the podcast, if you guys liked anything that you heard today, or if you know somebody who might benefit from this message, be sure to share this episode. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe on whatever platform you're using to listen to it on. And if you're feeling really generous, leave an Apple Podcast rating and review, because that helps more people find the show. All right, guys, that's it for now. I'm happy to be back. Thanks for listening. And remember that when we work together to lift up fatherhood, we're going to change the world one dad at a time. So until next time, live inspired.